The orc woman leaning against the village well was not remotely subtle, and Nolan Quincy had started to notice. He worked the winch in silence, drawing another bucket from the depths while half the village did their washing nearby. The morning sun caught the water as it rose, droplets scattering light across the worn stones. When he straightened to pour it into the communal trough, his shoulders shifted beneath his work shirt. "Again," she said. Nolan paused, bucket still tilted. He looked at her properly for the first time that morning. Green skin, small tusks barely visible when her mouth was closed, pointed ears poking through dark hair pulled into a practical braid. She held a leather-bound notebook open on her knee, but her pencil had not moved. "Pardon." Flex again. Elyra Dane tapped the blank page with one blunt fingernail. "For science." She did not write anything. Nolan set the bucket down carefully. Around them, the village women pretended not to listen while absolutely listening. Old Mrs. Harrow paused mid-scrub, her laundry forgotten. Two younger girls giggled behind their hands. "Science," he repeated. "Yes." Elyra's voice stayed perfectly level, though her ears had darkened to a deeper green. "I am conducting observational research on human physiology. Regional variations in muscular development. Very important work." The pencil remained motionless. Nolan considered this. He was not a complicated man. He worked the Greentree farm 6 days a week, kept his tools sharp, and spoke when speech was needed. If this orc woman wanted to study farming builds for her research, that seemed reasonable enough. He gripped the winch handle and cranked it again, drawing up another bucket. The mechanism required a solid pull, and his forearms tightened visibly with the effort. Elyra's pencil did not so much as twitch toward the paper. "Fascinating," she said, voice slightly strangled. "The deltoid engagement is quite pronounced." "Is that good for your science?" Nolan asked, pouring the water with the same methodical care he brought to every task. "Yes, very scientific, extremely educational." She cleared her throat. "Perhaps one more observation." She still had not written a single word. This continued for 3 more buckets. By the 5th, Mrs. Harrow had given up all pretense of working and simply watched with her arms crossed and a knowing smile creasing her weathered face. The younger girls had dissolved into barely suppressed laughter. Nolan finished filling the trough and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Will you need more observations tomorrow?" Elyra snapped the notebook shut so quickly she nearly caught her thumb. "Possibly. The research is ongoing. Science does not rest." "Neither does the washing," Mrs. Harrow called out, finally breaking her silence. "But it does require water, which some folks are monopolizing for educational purposes." Elyra stood abruptly, tucking the notebook under her arm. Up close, Nolan realized she was not particularly tall for an orc, barely reaching his shoulder. She had the soft build of someone who spent more time thinking than hauling, though her hands showed calluses from writing and walking. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, attempting dignity. "I draw water every morning," Nolan said simply. "Excellent. For science." She nodded once decisively and walked away with her spine very straight and her notebook still determinedly closed. Mrs. Harrow waited exactly 3 seconds before speaking. "That girl could not be more obvious if she carved your name in a tree." Nolan picked up the empty buckets. "She is a researcher." The old woman's laughter followed him all the way back to the Greentree farm. Elyra made it to the edge of the village before she opened her notebook and pressed her burning face against the cool leather. The pages inside contained detailed sketches of withering wheat stalks, careful notes about livestock losing weight despite adequate feed, and a growing map of affected farms. Not one word about human deltoids. She had come to this frontier region tracking reports of a mysterious blight. 3 valleys over, entire harvests had failed. Cattle had sickened and died. The pattern was spreading, and no one could determine why. Elyra had spent 2 years studying agricultural diseases, and she knew this was something new, something dangerous. She also knew that the moment she had seen Nolan Quincy working the well that first morning, her carefully professional focus had developed an extremely unprofessional crack. It was the quiet competence, she told herself. The economic grace of someone who never wasted a movement. The way he had noticed her watching and simply nodded, as if orc researchers were a normal part of his morning routine. Also his shoulders, but that was entirely beside the point. Elyra forced herself to open the notebook properly and review her actual findings. She had identified 12 farms with early signs of the blight. The pattern made no sense yet. Different crops, different soil types, different water sources. The only commonality was timing, everything showing symptoms within the past 2 months. She needed help. She needed someone who knew this land intimately, who could spot changes a newcomer would miss. She needed a local guide with patience and observational skills. She absolutely did not need to make a fool of herself at the village well every morning, but apparently that was happening regardless. The next morning, Nolan arrived at the well to find Elyra already there, notebook open, pencil poised. She looked very determined. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She took a breath. "I need to ask you something actually related to research, not just watching you work." Nolan set down his buckets and waited. "Have you noticed anything strange with the crops lately? Or the livestock?" Elyra leaned forward, professional focus sliding into place. "Any plants withering for no clear reason, animals refusing feed, unusual discoloration in leaves or grain?" He thought about it with the same careful consideration he brought to everything. Mrs. Harrow mentioned her tomatoes dying off, west corner of her garden. She thought it was the heat, but we have had cooler weather than last year. Elyra was writing now, pencil flying across the page. "When did they start failing? 6 weeks ago, perhaps 7. What about the Green Tree Farm? Anything there? Some of the spring wheat looks thin. The cows are eating but not putting on weight like they should." Nolan frowned, memory clearly sifting through details. "The pigs seem fine." "The chickens too, just the cows and the wheat." "Can you show me?" Elyra asked. "The specific fields, the exact plants. Now, if your employer can spare you." Nolan considered. "Master Greentree sent me for water. If I tell him there is a blight researcher who needs a guide, he will want the fields checked. He is not a fool, and a failed harvest ruins everyone. Then take me to him." Marcus Greentree was a practical man who had been farming the frontier for 30 years. When Nolan brought an orc researcher to his doorstep explaining crop diseases, Marcus did not waste time on questions about her species. He wanted to know if his livelihood was in danger. "Show her everything," he told Nolan. "Whatever she needs to see. If there is something killing the wheat, I want to know before I lose the whole field." So began Elyra's education in the intimate details of the Greentree Farm, narrated in Nolan's sparse, precise observations. He walked her to the wheat field and pointed out subtle discolorations she would have missed. "This section here, planted same day as the rest, same seed stock, but you can see the yellowing at the base." Elyra crouched, examining the stalks carefully. The damage was early, barely noticeable unless you knew what healthy wheat should look like. She pulled out a small knife and took samples, wrapping them in cloth. "When did you plant this field?" 8 weeks ago. Spring planting. From seed you stored over winter or purchased new." Nolan paused. "Master Greentree bought seed this year, said the merchant had a good price on a hardy strain." Elyra's head snapped up. "Which merchant?" "Petram and Sons. They come through every spring." She was writing again, fast enough that her handwriting devolved into shorthand only she could read. "Do you remember if other farms bought from the same merchant?" "Most did. It was a good price." "I need a list of every farm that purchased seed from Petram and Sons this spring." "Can you help me with that?" Nolan met her eyes, and something in his expression shifted. The quiet farmhand receded, replaced by someone sharper, more focused. "You think the seed is the problem. I think it is a possibility that needs investigation. That would ruin Petram." "That is a serious accusation." "That is why I need evidence before I make it." Elyra stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Will you help me?" He nodded once. "I will help you with the science." Her ears went darker again, but she managed not to smile. Over the following days, they established a pattern. Nolan worked his regular hours on the farm, but his morning water drawing now included detailed reports for Elyra. In the afternoons, when his labor was done, he guided her to neighboring farms. His value became clear immediately. Nolan knew every family within 10 miles. He knew their fields, their habits, their planting schedules. More importantly, he remembered everything. Elyra would ask about a farm they had visited 2 days prior, and he could recall exactly which corner of which field had shown symptoms. What the farmer had said about their seed source when they first noticed problems. "You have an extraordinary memory," she told him after he recited the planting dates for 6 different farms without hesitation. "I pay attention," he said simply. They were walking between properties, following a cart path through scrubby frontier woodland. The afternoon sun filtered through new leaves. Nolan moved with the steady, untiring pace of someone accustomed to long days. Elyra had to work to keep up, though she tried not to show it. "Most people pay attention. Very few can recall details the way you do." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "The land does not change much out here. When something is different, it stands out. That is exactly the skill I need." She consulted her notebook, comparing notes. "According to my map, we have now visited 18 farms. 12 show signs of the blight. Of those 12, 11 purchased seed from Petram and Sons this spring." "What about the 12th, the widow Meacham?" "She saved her own seed from last year's harvest." Elyra tapped the page thoughtfully. "Her crops are failing too, but she borders the Harrington farm, which did buy from Petram. If this is seed-borne, contamination could spread through water runoff or shared tools." "What about the farms that bought from Petram but are not showing problems?" 3 out of 11. "I need to know what makes them different." Elyra flipped back through her notes. "The Dorset farm, the Klein property, and the old Fletcher place. Can we visit those tomorrow?" "The Dorset farm is a half-day's walk north." "Then we should leave early." Nolan glanced at her. Elyra had been walking frontier farmland for 4 days straight, filling notebooks with observations, collecting samples, asking endless questions. Her boots were dusty and her braid had come half undone, but her focus never wavered. "You care about this," he said. It was not a question. "A blight like this can destroy entire communities. People starve. They lose their homes, their livelihoods." Her voice was quiet but fierce. "Yes, I care. Even though most of them are human. Even though half the valley probably thinks you should not be here." Elyra stopped walking. They were alone on the path, surrounded by the soft sounds of the forest. She turned to face him fully. "Plants do not care about species," she said. "Neither does hunger. If I can stop this, I stop it for everyone." Nolan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, a fractional movement that somehow conveyed complete understanding. "We leave at dawn," he said. The walk to the Dorset farm took them through terrain Elyra had not yet seen, higher ground where the soil turned rocky and pine trees replaced the lowland oaks. Nolan maintained his steady pace, pointing out landmarks with minimal commentary. Stream runs fast here in spring. Dorset's cattle drink from it. Any dead fish, discolored water? No, clear and cold. Elyra made a note. Water source seemed an unlikely vector, but she was eliminating possibilities. They reached the Dorset property just after midday. The farmer, a gruff man with sun-weathered skin and suspicious eyes, looked at Elyra like she might be planning to steal his chickens. "An orc," he said flatly. "A researcher," Elyra corrected, keeping her voice professional. "I am investigating the crop failures affecting the valley. Nolan Quincy was kind enough to guide me." Dorset's expression softened slightly at Nolan's name. "You are the Greentree fellow. Heard you were walking around with some kind of scholar." "She knows what she is doing," Nolan said. Simple words, but the certainty in them made Dorset reconsider. "Fine. What do you want to see?" Elyra walked his fields with the same meticulous attention she had brought to every other farm. The Dorset wheat looked healthy. The beans were thriving. Even the vegetable garden showed no signs of distress. "You purchased seed from Petram and Sons this spring?" she asked. "I did. Good price on wheat seed." "But you did not plant it," Dorset scratched his jaw. "Meant to. But when I opened the sacks, the seed looked off. Color was not quite right. I have been farming 40 years, and something about it did not sit well with me." Elyra's pulse quickened. "What did you do with it, still sitting in my barn?" "Figured I would plant it late if I got desperate, but I had enough of my own saved seed to make do." "Can I see it?" The seed in Dorset's barn looked identical to samples Elyra had collected from affected farms. She examined it closely, spreading grains across her palm. To an untrained eye it would seem fine, but Dorset was right. The color was slightly off, a faint grayish tinge that should not be there. "May I take a sample?" "Take the whole damn sack if it helps. I am not planting it now." Back on the path, Elyra clutched the sample bag like it contained gold. "This is it. This is the proof I needed. The seed is contaminated. I will need to examine it more carefully, but yes, I think the seed itself is carrying the blight." She was almost running now, excitement overriding fatigue. "If we can prove it came from Petram, we can stop them from selling more. We can keep this from spreading further." Nolan caught her arm gently. "Slow down. It is a long walk back and you will exhaust yourself. But we know now." "We actually know. We do." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth, very slight, gone almost immediately. "That is good science." Elyra felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the walk. That evening, she spread her samples across the table in the room she had rented above the village tavern. Contaminated seed from affected farms. Clean seed from the Dorset barn. Her own control samples from healthy plants. The contaminated seed all showed the same grayish discoloration under magnification. More tellingly, when she crushed a few grains and examined them closely, she found evidence of fungal spores. Not a naturally occurring fungus, the pattern of infection suggested the seed had been stored improperly, allowed to get damp and moldy, then dried out and sold anyway. Negligence, not malice. But the result was the same. Ruined crops, threatened livelihoods, and a valley on the edge of famine. She needed more proof. She needed to trace the seed back to Petram's supply chain, needed to show a clear pattern of contamination across multiple batches. And she needed to do it before spring planting ended and more farmers sowed tainted seed. A knock on the door interrupted her work. Nolan stood in the hallway, cleaned up from the day's walk, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mrs. Harrow sent dinner. She said you probably forgot to eat." Elyra realized she had, in fact, forgotten to eat. "Thank you. Do you want to come in? I can show you what I found." He hesitated, propriety warring with curiosity. Curiosity won. He stepped inside, leaving the door open for appearances. Elyra showed him the samples, explaining the fungal contamination in terms he could understand. Nolan listened with complete focus, asking occasional questions that showed he grasped the implications. So Petram either knew and sold it anyway, or did not bother to check, he said finally. Yes, people trusted him. They spent money they could not afford to lose on that seed. I know. Nolan's jaw tightened. It was the most emotion Elyra had seen from him, a crack in that stoic exterior. What do? We need to visit the farms that bought from Petram and have not planted yet. Warn them before they put the seed in the ground. Then we need to confront Petram himself with the evidence. He will deny it. Not if we have enough proof, not if the entire valley is standing behind us. Elyra met his eyes. I need your help, Nolan. People trust you. If you vouch for this research, they will listen. You are the expert. And you are one of them. That matters here. She gestured at her green skin, her tusks. I can show them the science, but you can make them believe it. Nolan was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through with his usual care. Finally, he nodded. We start tomorrow. I know which farms have not planted yet. They worked through the evening, making lists, planning routes. The dinner Mrs. Harrow had sent grew cold, forgotten on the table. Outside, the sun set over the frontier valley, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. At some point, Elyra looked up from her notes to find Nolan watching her, not the way he had at the well, which had been simple masculine appreciation. This was different, thoughtful, assessing. What? She asked. You really do care about the science? Of course I do. That is why I am here. The well, he said slowly. That first morning, you were not actually researching human physiology. Elyra's ears betrayed her immediately, darkening to deep green. I might have been slightly distracted from my primary research focus. For science, Nolan said deadpan. For science, she agreed weakly. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. I knew, you did not write anything down, seemed strange for a researcher. Elyra dropped her face into her hands. I am a terrible scientist. No, his voice was quiet but certain. You are an excellent scientist. You are just also a woman who was looking. She peered at him through her fingers, and that was acceptable. It was flattering. Something warm and fragile bloomed in Elyra's chest. She lowered her hands carefully, like sudden movements might shatter the moment. You are a very strange man, Nolan Quincy. He raised an eyebrow. Because I did not mind being admired. Because you took me seriously anyway. Because you are helping me even though it means going against a merchant your community has trusted for years. Because you remember every single detail of every farm we visit, and you do not even realize how extraordinary that is. Nolan looked uncomfortable again, but did not deflect. Someone needed to help you. It might as well be me. Why you specifically? Because I pay attention, he said, echoing his earlier words. And because you asked. It was such a Nolan answer, simple and honest and completely lacking in pretense. Elyra found herself smiling despite the seriousness of their work. Well, she said, thank you for paying attention. Thank you for asking me to flex, he replied, perfectly serious. Elyra laughed, surprised and delighted. Nolan's mouth curved into something that was definitely a smile this time, small but genuine. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The next week was a blur of urgent travel. They visited every farm that had purchased seed from Petram and Sons, but had not yet planted. Some farmers were skeptical, especially when they saw an orc woman making the accusations. But Nolan's quiet endorsement carried weight, and Elyra's evidence was undeniable once people actually looked at the samples. Old man Kershaw, who ran a small holding on the valley's eastern edge, actually thanked her with tears in his eyes. That seed was all I could afford this year. If it had failed, I would have lost everything. They saved his farm. They saved a dozen farms, but there were others where they arrived too late, fields already sown with contaminated seed. Those farmers faced a grim choice: plow under the investment and replant with good seed if they could find it, or gamble that their fields might not be affected. Most chose to plow under. It hurt, watching grown men and women nearly weep over destroyed fields, but it hurt less than a complete crop failure would later. Through it all, Nolan was a steady presence. He carried Elyra's sample bags without complaint. He vouched for her findings when farmers wavered. He remembered which families needed the gentlest approach and which responded better to blunt facts. On the 5th day, walking back from the farthest northern farms, Elyra's exhaustion finally caught up with her. She stumbled on the path and Nolan caught her elbow. "Rest," he said. "We still have 2 farms to visit. Tomorrow, you are swaying on your feet." He guided her to a fallen log and made her sit. From his pack he produced bread and cheese, water and dried apples. Basic provisions, but Elyra ate like she was starving. "You need to pace yourself," Nolan said, not unkindly. "There is not time. Petram could leave the valley any day now. If he moves on before we build a strong enough case, this will keep happening in other communities. Burning yourself out will not help anyone." Elyra wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She leaned back against a tree trunk and closed her eyes. Just a few minutes. She woke to find her head on Nolan's shoulder and the sun much lower in the sky. He had not moved, just sat there letting her sleep, keeping watch. "I am sorry," she mumbled, sitting up quickly. "You needed rest. How long was I asleep? An hour, perhaps 2. And you just sat here, you were tired." He stood, brushing off his trousers. "We should head back, it will be dark soon." They walked in comfortable silence. Elyra was increasingly aware of small things. The way Nolan adjusted his pace so she could keep up easily, how he steered them around the rougher parts of the path, the quiet competence with which he navigated the failing light. "Why are you not married?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I apologize, that was intrusive." Nolan did not seem offended. "No one asked me." "I find that difficult to believe. The valley is small. Most women here have known me since childhood. I am not exciting." "You are kind and reliable and remarkably intelligent. Those are better than exciting." He glanced at her, expression unreadable in the dimness. "Is that the scientist's opinion?" "That is my opinion." They walked a bit further. Then Nolan said very carefully, "What about you? What about me?" "Why are you not married?" Elyra laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Most orc men want someone who fits their community better. Someone who stays home, raises children, does not wander the frontier investigating crop diseases. And human men generally do not look at orcs that way." "Generally," Nolan repeated, "generally. But not universally." Elyra's heart did something complicated in her chest. "No, I looked," he said quietly, "at the well and after. For science," she managed. "No." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the twilight his features were soft with shadow, "not for science." Elyra could hear her pulse in her ears. "Nolan, we should finish this first," he interrupted gently. "The blight, Petram, the valley's safety. When that is done, if you are still here, we can talk about the rest." It was the most words he had strung together at once, and they stole Elyra's breath. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked the last mile back to the village in charged silence. 2 days later, they had visited every farm in the valley. Elyra's evidence was comprehensive. Contaminated seed samples, testimony from affected farmers, documentation of Petram's sales, and comparative analysis showing clear correlation between the merchant's seed and crop failures. "We need to bring this to the village council," Elyra said. Present everything formally, Nolan nodded. I will arrange it. The council met in the village hall, a drafty building that served as courthouse, meeting place, and occasional dance hall. 5 elders governed the valley's affairs, 3 farmers, 1 craftswoman, and the tavern keeper who functioned as unofficial mayor. They looked skeptical when Nolan requested an emergency session. They looked more skeptical when he brought an orc researcher with him. This is highly irregular, said Garrett Frost, the eldest of the farming council members. This is urgent, Nolan replied. The valley's entire harvest is at risk. Miss Dane has evidence that needs to be heard. Elyra spread her documentation across the table. Samples, notes, maps showing the spread of contamination. She explained the fungal infection, the pattern of failures, the correlation with Petram's seed sales. The council listened with varying degrees of belief. These are serious accusations, said Marion Keyes, the craftswoman. Petram has been selling to this valley for 15 years, which is why people trusted him, Elyra said. That trust made it easier to sell inferior product without scrutiny. You are saying he knowingly sold contaminated seed, Garrett frowned. I am saying the seed was contaminated, and he sold it anyway. Whether that was intentional or negligent, the result is the same. We have only your word that this seed came from Petram. You have the word of 23 farmers who purchased from him this spring, Nolan interjected. I can bring them here if you need testimony. The council members exchanged glances. Edgar Wells, the tavern keeper, leaned forward. What do you want us to do, Miss Dane? Petram is supposed to return to the valley in 3 days for his usual spring circuit. When he arrives, confront him with this evidence. Demand inspection of his remaining inventory. If it is contaminated, refuse the sale and warn other communities he might visit. And if he refuses inspection, then you know he has something to hide. There was a long silence. Finally, Marion spoke. I move that we inspect any seed Petram offers for sale before allowing farmers to purchase. All in favor. 4 hands rose. Only Garrett abstained, clearly still uncertain. Motion carries, Edgar said. Miss Dane, we will need you present for the inspection. Your expertise will be valuable, of course. Walking out of the village hall, Elyra felt the tension drain from her shoulders. They believed us. You gave them evidence they could not ignore. Nolan's voice carried a note of satisfaction. That was good work. We did good work. I could not have built this case without you. They walked through the village in the late afternoon light. Spring flowers bloomed in window boxes. Children played in the common square. Normal life, continuing because they had stopped the blight from spreading further. 3 days, Elyra said. Then we confront Petram. 3 days, Nolan agreed. What should we do until then, he considered. You should rest. You have been working without pause for 2 weeks, so have you. I am used to it. Elyra stopped walking, seized by a sudden impulse. Come to dinner, tonight. I will cook or attempt to cook, and we can pretend to be normal people having a normal evening. Nolan raised an eyebrow. Can you cook? Adequately. Possibly. I have kept myself alive this long. That is not a high bar. Are you declining my invitation, Nolan Quincy? He smiled, that small, genuine expression she had learned to watch for. I accept. What time? Sunset. I will procure ingredients that are difficult to ruin. Elyra's room had a small hearth and basic cooking implements. She bought vegetables from the market, fresh bread from the baker, a bit of cheese and smoked meat. Nothing fancy, but honest food honestly prepared. Nolan arrived exactly at sunset, cleaned up and carrying a bottle of wine. I did not know you drank wine, Elyra said, accepting it. I do not, usually, but this seemed like an occasion. Why? We are celebrating. The valley is saved. That seems worth marking. They ate at the small table by the window, watching the sky darken. Elyra had indeed cooked adequately, producing a vegetable stew that was hearty if not elegant. The bread was good, the wine was better. "Tell me something," Elyra said. "Something not about the blight or farming or research." Nolan thought about it. "What do you want to know? Anything. Your favorite season, what you do when you are not working, your first memory." "Spring," he said after a pause. "I like spring. Everything is beginning. When I am not working, I walk, just walk, looking at things. My first memory is watching my father plow a field, the way the earth turned over, dark and rich. I was very small. You were always meant to work the land." "It seems so." He took a sip of wine. "What about you?" Elyra talked, surprising herself with how much she shared. Her childhood in a larger orc community to the east. Her fascination with plants that had driven her to study agriculture when her family expected her to marry and settle. The isolation of being the only woman she knew who wanted something different. "I used to think I was broken," she admitted. "Everyone else seemed content with the life they had. I kept looking for more, kept asking why, kept wanting to understand how things worked." "That is not broken. That is curious." My mother called it restless. "You can be both." Outside, stars appeared one by one. The wine bottle emptied. The candles burned low. And somewhere in the comfortable conversation, Elyra realized she was happy in a way that had nothing to do with her research. "Nolan," she said softly. He met her eyes across the table. "When this is over, when Petram is dealt with, I would like to stay in the valley for a while. Continue my research, yes, but also just be here. I would like that. Even though I am an orc, even though people will talk." "Let them talk." His voice was quiet but firm. "You are brilliant and dedicated, and you care about people you have no reason to care about. The rest does not matter." Elyra reached across the table. Nolan took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. They sat like that until the candles guttered out. Petram and Sons arrived in the valley 3 days later with 2 wagons full of seed, tools, and spring goods. Aldrich Petram himself was a jovial man with a merchant's easy smile and a talent for remembering names. He set up in the village square as he had every spring for 15 years, greeting old customers like friends. The council let him unpack completely before they approached. Edgar Wells led the delegation, with Elyra and Nolan flanking him. "Aldrich," Edgar said, "we need to talk about the seed you sold this spring." Petram's smile did not waver. "Excellent quality as always. Are you looking to purchase more? We are looking to inspect what you are selling." Now the smile faltered slightly. "Inspect," Elyra stepped forward. "I am an agricultural researcher. I have been investigating crop failures across the valley. The evidence suggests contamination in seed purchased from your spring inventory." Petram's expression hardened. "That is a serious accusation, miss." "That is why we are giving you the opportunity to cooperate," Edgar said. "Open your seed stores for inspection. If the grain is clean, you can sell it with the council's endorsement. If it is contaminated, you pack up and leave. And if I refuse, then you are not welcome here." A crowd had gathered, farmers and families drawn by the confrontation. Petram looked at them, calculating odds. "This is absurd. I have been supplying this valley for 15 years. "Then you have nothing to fear from inspection," Elyra said calmly. Petram's jaw tightened. For a moment, Elyra thought he might simply leave. Then he gestured sharply at his wagons. "Fine. Inspect away. You will find nothing wrong." Elyra pulled out her tools, magnifying glass, sample bags, reference materials. She examined the wheat seed first, spreading grains across a clean white cloth. The grayish discoloration was immediately visible. She crushed a few grains carefully, examining the interior. Fungal spores, identical to the contaminated samples from affected farms. "This seed is infected," she said clearly, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "The same fungal contamination present in the spring stock." "That is impossible," Petram blustered. "I source from reputable suppliers." "Then your suppliers stored it improperly and you failed to inspect it before sale." Elyra looked at him steadily. "Either way, it is unfit for planting." She checked the other seed varieties. The barley showed the same contamination. The oats were borderline, some sacks clean and some infected. Only the bean seed appeared unaffected. The crowd was murmuring now, angry voices rising. These were people who had trusted Petram, who had spent precious money on seed that would have destroyed their livelihoods. "You knew," someone shouted. "You knew and sold it anyway." "I did not know," Petram snapped. "This is slander. I will not stand here and be accused by some orc who probably caused the contamination herself." The crowd went silent. Elyra felt the weight of every eye on her, saw the uncertainty creeping into some faces. It was an old, familiar feeling. Being the outsider, the one who did not belong, the one who could not be fully trusted. Then Nolan stepped forward. "Miss Dane has spent 2 weeks walking every farm in this valley," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "She collected evidence, analyzed samples, and traced the contamination to its source. She warned families before they planted tainted seed. She saved this valley's harvest." He turned to face the crowd fully. "I walked with her. I saw the work. I verified every finding. This is not slander. This is science, and it is accurate." The murmuring started again, but the tone had changed. People were nodding. Marcus Greentree stepped forward to stand beside Nolan, then Mrs. Harrow, then the widow Meacham. One by one, farmers Elyra had helped move to her side of the square. Petram saw the tide turning. He gestured angrily to his workers. "Pack it up. We are leaving." "You will warn the other communities on your route," Edgar said. "It was not a request. You will tell them the seed is contaminated and you will not sell it." "You cannot force me, no, but I can send riders ahead of you to every town within a week's travel. We can make sure everyone knows what you tried to sell here." Edgar's expression was implacable. "Or you can do the right thing, dispose of the tainted seed, and try to rebuild your reputation honestly." Petram looked at the council, at the crowd, at Elyra. Finally, he spat on the ground and climbed onto his wagon. "Pack it up," he told his workers. "We leave within the hour." They watched the wagons roll out of the valley, carrying contaminated seed that would be buried or burned instead of planted. Elyra felt the tension drain out of her so completely she swayed. Nolan steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "It is over. It is over," she agreed. The crowd dispersed slowly. Several farmers stopped to thank Elyra personally. Mrs. Harrow kissed her cheek. Marcus Greentree offered her a standing invitation to inspect his crops any time she wished. By the time the square cleared, the sun was setting and Elyra was exhausted down to her bones. "Come on," Nolan said. "I will walk you back." They made it as far as the well before Elyra stopped. The same well where this had all begun, where she had made a fool of herself asking him to flex for science. She pulled out her notebook, the one she had carried through 2 weeks of fieldwork. The pages were full now, drawings, observations, measurements, maps. Every detail of the investigation that had saved the valley. On the last blank page she wrote a single name in careful letters, Nolan Quincy. "What is that?" he asked. "Science," she said. "Proper documentation. You were essential to this research. You should be recorded." "Is that the only reason you are writing my name?" Elyra closed the notebook and looked up at him. In the fading light, his features were soft, familiar after 2 weeks of constant companionship. She had memorized the set of his shoulders, the rare warmth of his smile, the quiet certainty with which he moved through the world. "No," she said honestly. "It is not the only reason." Nolan took the notebook from her hands and set it carefully on the well's rim. Then he cupped her face gently, calloused thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I am going to kiss you," he said, "for absolutely no scientific purpose whatsoever." "That seems acceptable," Elyra whispered. He kissed her as the sun set over the valley they had saved together, and it was nothing like research and everything like coming home. Spring turned to summer. The fields that had been saved from contaminated seed grew tall and green. The families who had nearly lost everything watched their crops thrive with grateful hearts. Elyra stayed. She rented a small cottage on the edge of the village and turned half of it into a laboratory. Her research continued, broader now, examining soil health and crop rotation and disease prevention. Farmers brought her their questions, their failing plants, their concerns. She became a fixture in the valley, the orc woman who had saved the harvest, the researcher who cared. Nolan visited every evening after his work was done. Sometimes they talked about crops and science. More often, they simply existed together, comfortable in the quiet companionship that had grown between them. On a warm evening in midsummer, walking back from the Greentree farm, Nolan said, "Master Greentree is getting old. He has been talking about selling the farm." "To whom?" "Me, if I want it. He would take payment over time." Elyra's heart kicked. "Do you want it?" "I do." He paused. "It is a lot of land for one person to manage. You would need help." "I would." "What kind of help?" Nolan stopped walking. They were on the path between fields, surrounded by growing wheat that rustled in the evening breeze. He took Elyra's hand. "The kind of help that stays," he said quietly. "The kind that comes with a ring and a promise and a shared life." Elyra's breath caught. "Nolan, people will talk. Some will disapprove. It will not be easy." "I know, but I do not care about easy." He met her eyes steadily. "I care about you. About the life we could build together. About waking up every morning knowing you are there." "I have research," Elyra said. "I will need to travel sometimes, investigate other regions, continue my work." "I know. And I cannot promise to be a traditional farm wife. I will probably spend as much time in the laboratory as the kitchen." "I know that too. And you still want this." Nolan pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small green stone. "I still want this," he said. "If you do." Elyra looked at the ring, at Nolan's patient face, at the fields stretching around them. She thought about the well where they had met, about 2 weeks of walking farmland together, about quiet evenings and shared purpose, and the way he had stood beside her when the crowd wavered. "Yes," she said. "I want this." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her there in the wheat field, surrounded by the summer evening and the distant sound of birdsong. They married in the autumn, after the harvest was in, and the fields lay golden with stubble. It was a small ceremony. Family and friends gathered in the village square. Mrs. Harrow cried happy tears. Marcus Greentree gave the bride away, since Elyra's own family was too far to travel. Edgar Wells officiated with surprising dignity. When the ceremony ended and Nolan kissed his wife for the first time in front of the whole valley, the cheers were genuine and loud. The wedding feast lasted until dark. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. Elyra danced with her husband, with Marcus, with a dozen farmers who had come to respect her work. She laughed more than she had in years. Late in the evening she found herself at the well again, catching her breath. Nolan joined her, bringing 2 cups of cider. "Tired?" he asked. "Happy," she corrected. They stood together in the comfortable silence that had become their language. Around them the celebration continued, but for this moment they were alone. "Remember when you asked me to flex?" Nolan said, amusement coloring his voice. "For science," Elyra replied immediately, then laughed. "I was so obvious. You were charming. I was ridiculous. That too." He set down his cup and took her hand, the one wearing his ring. "But it worked. You got my attention. I was trying to get your shoulders." The attention was an unexpected benefit. Nolan laughed, the sound rare and wonderful. "Well, you got both." "Best research project I ever conducted," Elyra said, then paused. "Actually, the second best. The blight investigation was probably more important. More important but less romantic." "Significantly less romantic." He pulled her close and they swayed together to the distant music, not quite dancing, just being near. "Thank you," Elyra said quietly. "For what?" "For taking me seriously. For helping me save the valley. For loving me even though I am difficult and obsessive and cannot cook very well." "Thank you for being difficult and obsessive," Nolan replied. "For caring about people and plants and truth. For staying when you could have moved on to easier places." "This was never about easy." "No," he agreed. "It was about right." Winter came, and with it the slower rhythms of farm life. Nolan and Elyra settled into their shared existence on the Greentree farm, which everyone now called the Quincy Holding. The farmhouse was old but sturdy, and Elyra claimed the eastern room for her laboratory work. She continued her research through the cold months, analyzing soil samples and planning crop rotations. Farmers came to her with questions about their stored seed, about preparing for spring planting, about preventing the kind of blight that had nearly destroyed them. Nolan worked maintenance on tools and buildings, the necessary winter tasks that kept a farm ready for the growing season. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Elyra writing in her notebooks while Nolan carved or read or simply watched her work. "You are staring," she said one evening without looking up. "I am admiring. It is distracting. You told me once that I could look for science." Elyra glanced up, smiling. "That was before I had legitimate work to do. This is legitimate admiration." She set down her pencil and moved to sit beside him on the worn sofa. He put an arm around her, and she tucked herself against his side. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Yes." "No regrets about marrying an orc researcher who turns half your house into a laboratory? No regrets?" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Are you happy?" "Yes." "No regrets about marrying a quiet farmer who is not very exciting? You saved a valley with me. You stood against a merchant everyone trusted because the evidence demanded it. You proposed in a wheat field." Elyra looked up at him. "That is exactly the right amount of exciting." They sat together as the fire crackled and the winter wind howled outside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more research, the endless cycle of farm life. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found each other at a well, who had worked together to save their community, who had built something real and lasting from curiosity and respect and love. When spring returned, they planted the fields together. Elyra had developed a new crop rotation schedule based on her research, designed to improve soil health and prevent disease. Nolan implemented it with his usual careful precision. The growing season was good. Rain came when needed. The sun shone. The crops grew strong and green, untainted by blight or contamination. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Elyra stood at the edge of the wheat field, watching Nolan work. He moved with the same economical grace that had caught her attention that first morning at the well, that same quiet competence. She pulled out her notebook, the same one she had carried through their investigation. The last pages contained scattered notes from the winter, observations and ideas for future research. But the very last page still showed only one entry, Nolan's name written in careful letters. She added a line below it now: partner, husband, home. Not very scientific, perhaps, but entirely true. Nolan finished his work and walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What are you writing?" "Research notes," Elyra said, closing the notebook. "For science. For everything." He smiled, that small, genuine expression she had learned to treasure. "Flex again," Elyra laughed, delighted. "Always for science, Nolan Quincy. Always for science." He kissed her there in the spring sunlight, surrounded by healthy crops and clear sky and the life they had built together. And if anyone in the valley thought it strange that the orc researcher and the quiet farmer had found each other, well, they kept those thoughts to themselves, because some things did not need to make sense to everyone. Some things just needed to be true. The years that followed were good ones. The farm prospered under their combined efforts. Nolan's knowledge of the land paired with Elyra's scientific approach to agriculture. They became known throughout the region, the farming couple who had stopped the blight, who grew the healthiest crops, who welcomed questions and shared knowledge freely. Other farms began adopting Elyra's crop rotation methods. Yields increased across the valley. The community grew stronger, more food secure, less vulnerable to the kind of crisis that had nearly destroyed them. Elyra published papers on agricultural disease prevention. Her research gained attention from scholars in distant universities. Offers came for her to speak, to teach, to join academic institutions. She turned them all down. "Why?" Nolan asked when she declined an invitation from a prestigious university 3 valleys away. "Because my research is here," Elyra said simply. "The farms, the people, the land I know. And because you are here. I would not stop you from going, I know. That is one of the many reasons I am staying." In their 3rd year of marriage, Elyra realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never particularly imagined herself as a mother, too focused on her work to consider children seriously. But when she told Nolan, the quiet happiness in his face made her certain this was right. Their daughter was born in early autumn, during harvest time. She had her mother's green skin and her father's dark hair, and she screamed with impressive volume for someone so small. They named her Dara. Nolan held his daughter with the same careful precision he brought to everything, supporting her head, watching her tiny face with wonder. "She is perfect," he said. "She is loud," Elyra replied, exhausted and happy. "That too." Mrs. Harrow helped during the early weeks, bringing food and wisdom and the kind of practical support that kept new parents sane. The village women who had once viewed Elyra with suspicion now brought gifts and advice, welcoming the baby with genuine warmth. "People change," Mrs. Harrow said, holding Dara while Elyra ate. "You proved yourself. They know what you did for the valley. And this little one is as much theirs as yours." Motherhood was harder than Elyra had anticipated. Dara was demanding, requiring constant attention. Sleep became a distant memory. Her research languished as exhaustion and infant care consumed her days. But there were moments of piercing sweetness too. Dara's first smile, the weight of her sleeping in Elyra's arms, watching Nolan sing quiet lullabies to his daughter, his deep voice surprisingly melodic. When Dara was 3 months old, Elyra managed to return to her laboratory for a few hours. Nolan took the baby, walking her through the fields while Elyra attempted to remember what she had been working on before pregnancy and birth had scrambled her brain. She found herself staring at blank pages, mind equally blank. Nolan appeared in the doorway, Dara sleeping against his shoulder. "Any luck? My brain is gone. I used to think complex thoughts. Now I just think about feeding schedules and nap times. It will come back." "What if it does not? What if I lost the ability to focus on anything more complicated than keeping a tiny human alive? Nolan sat down beside her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. You did not lose anything, you are just tired. Give yourself time. Time, Elyra repeated doubtfully. You saved a valley while walking yourself to exhaustion. You can handle one small person. One small person is somehow more challenging than agricultural disease prevention. Different skills, Nolan agreed, but you will learn them the same way you learned everything else, by paying attention and refusing to quit. Elyra leaned her head on his shoulder, mirroring how Dara slept against him. I am glad I married you, for my optimism, for your unshakable belief that I can do things even when I am certain I cannot. You can, he said simply. You always do. Gradually, life found a new rhythm. Dara grew, becoming more independent, sleeping longer stretches. Elyra's research resumed in fits and starts, work done in stolen hours between childcare. It was slower than before, but it continued. When Dara was 2, able to toddle around and investigate everything with determined curiosity, Elyra found herself pregnant again. Their son was born in spring, quieter than his sister, with his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's pointed ears. They named him Perrin. 2 children made the juggling act more complex, but also strangely easier. Dara loved her brother with fierce devotion. Nolan managed childcare with the same calm competence he brought to farming. And Elyra learned to work in smaller increments, to accept that her research would progress differently than it had before children. The farm grew as the family did. They added livestock, expanded the fields, built a larger laboratory for Elyra. Nolan hired seasonal help during planting and harvest, young farmers eager to learn his methods. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was good. One summer evening when Dara was 6 and Perrin was 4, the whole family walked to the village well. It was a tradition now, evening walks after supper, letting the children run off energy before bed. Dara ran ahead, chasing butterflies. Perrin walked between his parents, holding both their hands. The sun painted everything gold. At the well, Dara climbed up on the rim, fearless. Tell the story, Mama, about how you and Papa met. It was her favorite story, requested constantly. Elyra glanced at Nolan, who smiled. Your mother demanded that I flex, for science. But she did not write anything down, Dara recited, knowing the story by heart. She did not, Nolan confirmed. Very suspicious research methods. And then you saved everyone from bad seed, Dara continued. And then you got married and had us. That is the abbreviated version, Elyra said, lifting Perrin to sit on the well beside his sister. There was a bit more in between. Tell the long version, Perrin said, so they did, standing there in the summer twilight, recounting how an orc researcher and a quiet farmer had found each other. How curiosity had turned to partnership, partnership to friendship, friendship to love. How they had saved their community together and built a life that neither had quite imagined but both cherished. The children listened raptly. Even though they had heard it all before, when the story ended, Dara said, I want to be a researcher like Mama. You can be anything you want, Elyra told her. I want to be a farmer like Papa, Perrin announced. You can be that too, Nolan said. They walked home as the stars appeared, 2 children chattering between 2 parents who had built something lasting from a chance meeting at a village well. That night, after the children were asleep, Elyra sat in her laboratory updating her notes. Years of research now filled dozens of notebooks. Agricultural studies, disease prevention, soil analysis, crop rotation schedules that were used across the entire region. She pulled out the original notebook from that first investigation. The pages were worn now, edges softened by time and handling. She flipped to the last page, to Nolan's name and the words she had added that spring day: partner, husband, home. She added one more line: father, forever. Then she closed the notebook and went to find her husband. He was on the porch, watching the night. She sat beside him and he put an arm around her automatically. "Good day," he asked. "Good life," she corrected. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other completely. From walking fields together, raising children together, building a farm and a family and a future together. "No regrets?" Nolan asked, echoing their old conversation. "Not one," Elyra said. "You?" "Not one." The night wind carried the scent of growing wheat, the promise of another good harvest. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the valley they had saved together lived and thrived. It was not the life Elyra had imagined when she first came to this frontier village to investigate a blight. It was better. Messier, more complicated, infinitely richer. She thought about that first morning at the well, asking Nolan to flex for science while not writing anything down. The memory made her smile. "What are you thinking about?" Nolan asked. "Science," Elyra said, "and how the best research sometimes leads you places you never expected." "Is that what I was? Unexpected research? You were everything unexpected." She kissed him softly. "Everything good." He pulled her closer, and they sat together under the stars. Two people who had found each other through contaminated seed and crop failures, and one very unscientific request at a village well. The years continued. Dara did become a researcher, though her focus was botany rather than agriculture. She left for university when she turned 18, filled with the same restless curiosity that had driven her mother. Perrin stayed on the farm, learning from his father, eventually taking over most of the daily operations as Nolan's hair grayed and his movements slowed. Elyra kept working, her research evolving as she aged. She trained younger scholars, passing on knowledge accumulated over decades. Her papers were cited in agricultural texts across the region. Universities that had once invited her to join their faculties now sent students to study with her. She and Nolan grew old together on their farm, watching seasons turn and grandchildren visit, and the valley continue to prosper. On a spring morning in their 35th year of marriage, they walked to the village well together. Nolan moved slower now, leaning slightly on Elyra's arm. Her own joints ached, her hands twisted slightly from arthritis, but they still walked. The well was the same, worn stones and old winch, still providing water for the village. "You remember?" Elyra asked. "Every detail," Nolan said. "You leaned right there, demanded I flex. Did not write a single word. Terrible research methodology, the best research I ever participated in." Elyra laughed, the sound carrying across the square. A few villagers looked over and smiled, recognizing the old couple who had saved their valley decades ago. "Flex again?" she asked, the old joke warm between them. Nolan straightened as much as his aging body allowed and made an exaggerated show of flexing. The muscles were still there, though softened by time. "For science?" he asked. "For everything," Elyra said. She pulled out a notebook, newer than the original but in the same style. On a blank page she wrote, 35 years, still for science, still for love." Nolan read over her shoulder and smiled. "That is good documentation. I learned from experience. Record what matters. What matters." Elyra gestured at the well, the village, the fields beyond. "This, you, the life we built, the work we did, the family we made. That is a lot of variables for one experiment. The best experiments always are." They stood together in the spring sunlight. Two old researchers who had found each other through curiosity and contaminated seed, and one wonderfully ridiculous request at a village well. The valley around them thrived, protected by agricultural methods they had pioneered together. Their children carried on their work. Their grandchildren played in fields made productive by their research. It was a good legacy, a good life, a good love. "Ready to go home?" Nolan asked. "Always," Elyra said, taking his arm. They walked back to the farm together, moving slowly but moving together, the way they had for 35 years. The way they would for however many years remained. Behind them, the village well stood quiet in the morning sun, witness to where it had all begun. One orc woman, one human man, and a request that had nothing to do with science and everything to do with seeing someone clearly for the first time. The wheat in the fields was coming up green and strong, another good year beginning. The work continued. The seasons turned. And in a small farmhouse on what had once been the Greentree property, two people who had saved a valley together sat down to breakfast, still partners, still researchers, still finding new things to discover in each other after all these years. For science, they would have said if anyone asked. But really, it had always been for love.